Hi guys, we are coming back to you from the Brickstore Museum with another story of a piece that's here in our collection, on our collections visits series going on during the closure. And this one is our Weathervane that just returned right before the museum had to close. It just had returned from being conserved. So it's a wooden Weathervane, and you can't see it underneath the wrapping here, but basically it looks like an ear of corn. So these little offshoots are the leaves, with the centerpiece being the corn. And it used to sit atop the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is across the street from the museum. Used to sit atop its steeple. Now it has a replacement, and in 2003 the museum purchased this Weathervane from the Unitarian Church to make sure that it could be preserved here in our collection for the remainder of time. We sent it off to be conserved because, as you can probably tell, when wood is sitting atop a church steeple for 100 years or so, it will certainly deteriorate, and then obviously paint and the solid wood are gonna kind of fall apart. So when we sent this off to the conservator, pieces like this, like the leaves that I was pointing out, were disconnected from the entire Weathervane. So what the conservator did was bring it back to a state that it would be, solid enough to exhibit again. So we didn't want it all the way redone because, it is not 1799. So these are, as every piece in our collection, are pieces that were used by people here in the Kennebunks. And so you're not ever going to see a perfect artifact that has never been touched. So, but what's interesting here is you can see the little pieces of gilt that are left on there. So when it used to sit atop the steeple, it would have kind of gleamed in the sunlight when it was turning. And if you're ever in downtown Kennebunk, you can certainly see an example of that for the replacement that's now sitting on top of the steeple. So for those that wonder how we keep track of all of our collections, we have these folders that tell the story of how every piece got here, who the donor was, what their relationship was to Kennebunk history, condition of the artifact, and everything else in between. So in this folder that we have here about the Weathervane, you can see here's its accession number. As I said, it was purchased in 2003, so that's why its accession number starts with 2003. And then there's a whole bunch of pieces of information regarding the purchase and the sale of the Weathervane, and press releases. Here it sits in a Skinner auction catalog. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Here's the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church had done a little report on the Weathervane before they took it down. And then there's some letters that go back and forth between the Unitarian Universalist Church and the museum, as we were trying to sort out how to bring it into our collection. So I think the piece that'll probably describe it the best is, I found in our collection here of papers, of course I can't find it now, I found here, so this is the listing in the Skinner auction catalog, again from 2003. So it says, this Weathervane came from the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church of Kennebunk, Maine. The first part of the church was built in 1772. In 1803, renovations were done, including a bell tower, and in 1804 a Paul Revere bell was placed, along with a steeple, and most likely the Weathervane. So they're judging this Weathervane to be about 1804. basically the jobs were executed by a local housewright named Thomas Eaton. His designs were influenced by the renowned Boston architect Asher Benjamin, who lived 1773 to 1845. And again, this is a report on the Weathervane and what happened in between. So this is just generally a letter from somebody at Skinner Auctions talking to the folks at the Unitarian Universalist Church about replacing this Weathervane with a replica to make sure that this one was handed down properly. And what I'm actually looking for that I can't find, here it is, is a press release from 2003 from the museum. That's our old logo, you can see. And it says, Brickstore Museum rescues historic Weathervane. So I'll read a couple lines just so you can get the story of why it ended up here. Brickstore Museum announces with great pride that it has acquired the historic ear of corn Weathervane from the steeple of Kennebunk's First Parish Unitarian Church. The large carved wooden sculpture, shining gold against the sky, witnessed 200 years of local history. Most notably, it was a symbol of tradition and prosperity during the 1818 visit to Kennebunk by the Marquis de Lafayette along Kennebunk's Main Street. Though only a few traces of its original gold leaf remain, which is what we looked at before, and its wood has eroded considerably, the Weathervane is still a remarkable Kennebunk icon. So it goes on to say that the congregation of the church basically felt that they couldn't properly care for the piece anymore, since it was falling apart. Again, due to being on top of a steeple in the weather for over 200 years, and it's wood, it's just bound to deteriorate. So they voted to sell it through Skinner Auctions, which would allow them to raise money for a replacement to be installed. So once the Brickstore Museum Collections Committee learned that it was going to be sold through Skinner Auctions, members of that committee felt strongly that the Weathervane needed to be preserved here in Kennebunk. So a dialogue with members of the church's board and the Brickstore Museum resulted in an agreement that the museum would purchase the Weathervane outside of the auction. So the museum paid directly the Unitarian Universalist Church, so they would have the support that they needed, and the museum would have the piece to preserve for the history of the town. So here it sits in our collection now. If anybody's wondering, the museum paid $12,500 for this piece of Kennebunk history, all the way back in 2003, I should say. And it was on exhibition all the way up until it just couldn't be exhibited anymore. So now, let's take a look quickly at this second folder, which I have here, which our registrar, Catherine Hussey, and our collections manager, Leanne Hayden, so nicely put together, where this is our treatment report from East Point Furniture Conservation, which is who conserved this piece for us. And basically he's shown us in pictures what he's done. So here's a picture of the final piece. And here are the very specific images of taking paint off, restoring paint, taking out little nails and replacing them, doing all the very, very detailed work that comes with replacing and conserving things like this. So here, this is the example that I was talking about, where the leaves of the ears of corn, the pieces of wood, were detached from the ear of corn itself. And this is how it looked when it came in, when we had it delivered to East Point Conservation. And then again, as a comparison, this is then now how it looks, all conserved and ready to go. So once we are ready to get back up and running, this piece will be on full display, so you'll see it out of its wrapping, and on display in our bicentennial exhibit, still set to open in June 2020. So I hope you enjoyed that piece of history, and we will see you back here again for another object visit tomorrow.